What if I told you that most people are way off base when it comes to how much you really need to retire comfortably? No, you don't need a fortune sitting in your bank account to make it work. In fact, the numbers reveal most retirees are spending a lot less each year than people think. Let's start with something surprising. According to the latest data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a government agency that basically tracks how much we all spend, the average retired household in the US spends about $4,345 per month. That's a bit over $52,000 a year. Right now, I can just imagine someone watching with eyes wide thinking, wait, that's it? I thought it would be so much more. Now, before you get out your calculator and start panicking or planning your next vacation, let's unpack what that number really means. First, that $52,000 a year is an average. It doesn't matter if you're the type who wants to retire to a beach in Florida or prefers a quiet life in a small Midwestern town, that number is just a reference point, not a prescription. Also, and this is really important, we're talking about households, not individuals. The average retired household has about 1.7 people in it according to census data, so most are either married couples or maybe a parent and an adult child. So when you hear that retired folks are spending $4,345 a month, it's covering more than one person's living expenses. But where's all that money going? Let's break it down with the facts, not myths. Housing is by far the biggest bite out of the retirement budget. Retired households still spend over $1,600 a month on things like rent, mortgage payments, property taxes, and maintenance. A lot of people think, oh, once I pay off my house, I'm done. Actually, not quite. Even if you own your home free and clear, bills still roll in. Insurance, taxes, repairs, sometimes they creep up unexpectedly. Plus, moving to a fancy retirement community or somewhere with homeowners associations can actually make housing costs go up, not down. Next in line is transportation. Think cars, gas, insurance, those pesky repairs, and yes, for some retirees, even car payments. This averages around $670 a month. You might assume retirees just sell their cars and take up biking, but most still keep a car or two. Sure, they're not commuting every day, and maybe they're not shuttling kids around anymore, so some costs drop. But honestly, a lot of retirees like the freedom of driving, taking day trips, or just being able to get out when cabin fever sets in. Then there's healthcare. One of those topics nobody really wants to talk about. But sooner or later, we all have to face it. Nearly $600 a month on average goes toward things like insurance premiums, prescriptions, doctor visits, and those little surprises that Medicare doesn't cover. And get this, those costs usually tick up every year as you get older, not down. Food, of course, isn't getting any cheaper either. On average, retirees spend about $400 a month on groceries and another $200 eating out. Not a huge shock, given that inflation has been quietly nibbling away at everyone's food budget for years now. Some retirees become master home chefs and slash their dining out budget. Others see eating out as a treat, a social thing, or just something fun to do now that work isn't filling up the day. So where does this leave the average retired household? Well, beyond the big categories, there are plenty of smaller monthly expenses. Things like entertainment, clothing, gifts, and all the random stuff that just seems to come up in life. But even if you strip away the extras, retirement isn't exactly a bargain, at least not on paper. But here's the thing, regional differences in cost of living can be huge. Living in San Francisco is nothing like retiring in rural Mississippi. Where you live, how you want to live, who you're with, those choices can swing your budget up or down in a big way. Still, the $52,000 a year average gives us a solid baseline, a starting point for figuring out how retirees are really pulling it off. Now, I know what you're probably wondering. Okay, cool, but where's the money coming from? Let's talk about Social Security, since it's the bedrock of most retirement plans in the US. Right now, the average monthly Social Security check is about $2,000. Multiply by 2 if both you and a partner are collecting, and you're close to $4,000 a month, just a shade under that average $4,345 in spending. In other words, Social Security alone almost covers the average retired household spending. But what if you want to retire before Social Security kicks in, or just want to be extra safe? Financial planners often trot out the 4% rule. You take your total retirement savings, withdraw 4% a year, adjusted for inflation, and your money should last as long as you do. According to this rule, to reliably generate $52,000 a year, you'd need about $1.3 million set aside for retirement. Sounds like a lot, right? But remember, if you're collecting Social Security and only need to cover a smaller gap, say $4,000 a year after Social Security, you might only need about $100,000 saved up to make the numbers work. All right, that's the first half of the story, the actual numbers behind how retirees are making it work, and why the "you need millions" narrative isn't always true. In part 2, we'll dig even deeper. What if you're single? What if you don't want to rely on Social Security? And does everyone really need $52,000 a year? Or are most retirees living happy, fulfilling lives on way less? Stick around for part 2, where we unpack all of that and help you figure out what your personal retirement target should look like. Here's part 2 of our deep dive into what retirement really looks like for most Americans and how much you actually need to make it work. No sugarcoating, no wild guesses, just a straight talk. Let's pick up where we left off. If you're single and retiring, you might be looking at an average Social Security check of about $2,000 a month, or around $24,000 a year. Sounds a bit tight compared to that $52,000 average spent by retired households, right? But let's be honest, if you're on your own, you probably won't need as much as a two-person household. You can probably get by with a smaller place, eat out less, and split far fewer bills. So you'll likely spend less, but how much less depends on you. Now, if you want to cover the whole $52,000 with just your own savings, no Social Security at all, the math shifts. Using that 4% safe withdrawal rule, you'd need about $1.3 million stashed away. But if you expect to receive only one Social Security check and need to make up the gap on your own, you're looking at needing roughly $700,000 in savings to reliably provide the missing $28,000 each year. Still a sizable number, but it puts things in clearer perspective, especially if you've spent years worrying you'd need millions just to scrape by. But let's step back and ask an even bigger question. Does everyone need $52,000 a year in retirement? Absolutely not. That figure is an average, sometimes higher than what most households actually spend. It's boosted up by retirees who live large, travel often, or live in pricier zip codes. There are plenty of people living on much less, either by choice or necessity, and still leading content lives. For millions of retirees, Social Security is the main or only source of income, and while it can be a tight squeeze, it's more common than you might think. Pause and remember, the median spending for retirees would be a more accurate symbol of the typical experience, but unfortunately, that figure isn't widely reported. The average can be skewed by a few lavish spenders at the top, while the majority live on a more modest budget. Still, even if you're shooting for something a notch above bare bones, retirement can be a lot more achievable than the headlines suggest. Now, what about taxes? I hear this question a lot, and honestly, it's one of the most frustrating to answer because there are so many variables. How much you'll shell out in taxes depends on where your money comes from. Traditional IRAs, Roth accounts, regular brokerage accounts, and even Social Security. Your tax bracket, where you live, whether you're single or married, it all factors in. But here's a bit of good news. Many retirees end up paying less in income tax than they did while working, especially if much of their income comes from Social Security or accounts that have already been taxed. So don't let tax worries totally throw you off your game plan. Let's zoom out and look at the big picture. Compared to the average working household across all age groups, which spends about $77,000 a year, retirees are managing just fine on much less, about 32% less in fact. That makes sense. You're probably not carting kids around, dressing up for the office, or grabbing lunch out every week. Maybe you've paid off the mortgage, downsized, or moved somewhere with a gentler cost of living. Your habits change, your priorities shift, and your spending usually follows right along. But remember, Just because average spending goes down doesn't mean everyone is pinching pennies in retirement. It's more about being smart with what you have, figuring out what matters most, and building a strategy that works for you, not your neighbor, not your cousin, but you. So where does this leave us? Don't let the 7-figure must-have myth scare you. If you're getting a decent Social Security check, living in an affordable area, and don't plan to splurge on luxury travel every month, you may only need to save enough to top off your income, perhaps a fraction of those scary numbers you see floating around. Here's a little perspective to wrap things up. Someone with $500,000 in savings and 2 Social Security incomes is probably pulling in almost $70,000 a year, comfortably above that $52,000 spending average. The point is, retirement doesn't have to be daunting or out of reach. It's about understanding your own needs, being realistic, and tuning out the one-size-fits-all voices. After all, retirement is about enjoying the time you've earned. Whether you're aiming to live large or just want a safe, happy, and simple life, the key is to plan for your reality, not someone else's. So what kind of retirement do you see for yourself? And how close are you really? Maybe closer than you think. Let's keep that conversation going.